House Targail. It was a name once known as the Emperor's Sword and the glory of the Empire. However, when the name no longer had any significance, it fell. Well, maybe saying it fell would not be accurate. It hit rock bottom. That's why Herin Targail, the eldest daughter of House Targail, was ordered to marry a man chosen by the Emperor. Now, Herin was not happy with that order, but the interesting part was that she was thinking that an arranged marriage would be impossible to imagine in Korea. Obviously, those thoughts would not make any sense for a normal woman in a swords and magic world. However, Herin was clearly not a normal woman. Nevertheless, while our blonde female protagonist was thinking about the modern world, her now fiancé was discussing the ground rules of their future married life. Those rules covered a wide range of things such as establishing Kyroxus as the middle name, sleeping together only once a week for their successor's sake, not intervening in each other's matters, and not begging for affection or love. Of course, it was hard to tell how much attention was Herin paying, since she was very focused on thinking that if her family was powerful like before, she would have not agreed to that. Sadly, they became powerless during her generation. Luckily, not everything was bad, since the woman considered that her husband-to-be was extremely good-looking. After all, the possibility of being forced to marry some wrinkly geezer was very real. However, in that scenario, the blonde lady would have lost it and wiped out the Imperial family. Well, at least that was what she thought. Nevertheless, despite his good looks, her fiancé had a serious attitude problem. It was obvious that she had been observing and analyzing him, and she noticed how confident he was about making her fall for him. Herin really looked like she had everything under control at that moment. But when the man asked her if there was something she'd like to say, the mask broke apart completely. The blonde woman immediately got nervous and grabbed the contract he had prepared in order to read it as fast as possible, because she knew that was her only chance at a rebuttal. Of course, Herin didn't allow her nervousness to get the best of her. She quickly regained control and even started to change some of the rules the man pretended to establish. However, those changes were not expected at all by him. Sleeping once a week. How about once a month instead? Having breakfast together every morning. Totally unnecessary. Respecting each other's personal time. That needed to be emphasized. The man almost tripped and started flinching due to his surprise. However, Herin was not planning of letting him go, and she kept making changes in every rule he had proposed. She even went as far as to complain about the way he was talking to her, since until they get married she was still of higher status than him, so talking down to her was totally inappropriate. It was at this moment when our female protagonist started narrating her life in that new world since the beginning. She was born in that world with her memories of her past life. In that previous life, she had been born into a wealthy family in Korea. After practicing kendo, which she had a talent for at that time, she took on fencing by chance. That led her to become a member of the national fencing team. Sadly, as she was preparing for the Olympics, a jealous team member pushed her down the stairs, ending her life at a young age without even a chance to win a medal. Afterwards, she was reborn as part of House Targail. House Targail was known as the Emperor's Sword. In each generation, a child with talent in swordsmanship was born. Nevertheless, for unknown reasons, a child with such talent had not been born into the family for quite some time. Then her brother Shaun was born, but even he wasn't talented with a sword. Years went by and their parents passed away while they were still young, and the family business also failed, putting them in debt. They asked for the Imperial family's help, but they refused them every time. The Order of Targail was also disbanded. They sold everything they had to survive, barely paying off their debt, and all that was left in their huge state were just Shaun and her. As the older sister, she was aware that she needed to make money to feed her brother and keep their state. The thing was how she was going to do that. Of course, she could have gotten married to a rich merchant, but the thought of that alone disgusted her, since they were not her type and she didn't want to throw her life away that easily. However, what could a daughter of a count do to make a living? In that moment, she had the idea of trying something with a sword, since she had wielded one in her past life, and the moment she went to the storage and grabbed a training sword, she felt chills going down her spine. It was as if she'd held a sword all her life. In the end, she came to a huge realization. The one who had the talent had been her all along. Sadly, during all that time, her brother Shaun blamed himself for all that had happened. Nevertheless, she couldn't let him know about that yet, since there was no way a woman could become a knight in that world. That's why, after spending several days thinking about the whole matter, she came to the conclusion that she should do whatever she could to keep them afloat. So after sending Shaun to his school's dormitory, she decided to become a mercenary. In order to do that, she had to cut and dye her hair and bound her chest to be able to head to the battlefield and make money. Becoming a mercenary was easy for her because every battlefield always had a demand for human shields and no one asked where she was from or who she was. Furthermore, she ended up siding with the Valor army and they paid her a lot, plus she was familiar with that area. Of course, the mercenary life was not easy. Despite her disguise, many men found her feminine enough to start harassing her. Fortunately, she had enough strength to beat the crap out of them in order to set an example and keep them in check. In fact, people started calling her the pretty-faced monster, which ended up becoming her nickname. Actually, her fame started growing to the point the rumors reached the ears of Shaun Kyroxus's troops. Yes, the troops of the guy who would eventually become her fiancé. Year 994. Enex calendar. Battle of Kirkla. The whole battlefield was a huge mess with blood everywhere and screams covering the entire area. In the middle of that chaos, Herin, still dressed like a man, was fighting against multiple enemies. Fortunately, thanks to her speed, agility, and graceful movements, she managed to defeat them time and time again. Sadly, they were outnumbered and eventually the retreat order came, so she didn't hesitate to follow it since she didn't want to die there. However, while she was running away, she saw a weird scene. A Valwarian knight was charging toward one of his own. It was a treacherous attack, and that was why the victim didn't see it coming and fell while the other yelled he hoped his victim rotted and died there. Herin at the beginning tried to ignore the whole thing since that was not of her business. However, her kindness got the best of her and she ended up helping the victim. Luckily, the man was still alive and conscious, so she picked him up off the floor and took him away. Some time later, she treated his wounds the best she could and managed to stop the bleeding. Of course, his condition made the man rave about killing everybody, which made Herin to wonder what wrong he had done to deserve that. Finally, the man woke up and after confirming she was a mercenary and a dude, she asked him why he had saved him. Herin replied she did it for no particular reason, and after telling him he was on his own from that moment on and leaving him a piece of bread, she prepared to leave. But the man asked what was her name. Herin answered he should tell him his name before that, to what the other replied Shaun Kyroxus. That surprised the woman since she didn't expect a direct answer, but she still fulfilled her part of the deal and told him his name was Herin. Afterwards, she left him without knowing that the man she just happened to save that day would later become her future husband. Some time later, Herin was eating in a tavern and some people near her were discussing how Shaun Kyroxus had been rising through the ranks despite his humble beginnings to the point he was leading the knights into battle in recent times. However, she couldn't keep listening to that conversation because a red-haired guy suddenly entered, and after confirming he was the pretty-faced monster, he decided to challenge our protagonist to a duel. Herin took her sword in one hand and a dagger in the other, which surprised the red-haired guy who was not expecting his opponent was a dual-wielding warrior. However, he was still confident and he even asked his opponent how he was planning to block his attacks. Herin, on the other hand, simply told him he was going to fall. And he did. The red-haired guy was so impressed that after introducing himself as Tarkan, he offered him to become his partner. He even went as far as saying he was willing to become his partner if he preferred it that way. But both offers were rejected by Herin. Some time later, our protagonist was in the middle of another battle when she suddenly sensed danger and quickly dodged some arrows. Afterwards, she located the archer and climbed a small mountain in order to get him. The archer shot several arrows, but all of them were evaded by Herin, who ended up beating the other. The archer begged for mercy and Herin didn't kill him. Then the other asked how he had dodged all the arrows, to what Herin replied he was not aiming correctly. Afterwards, the archer introduced himself as Raphine and said he would follow his orders from now on since he had spared his life. And he meant it because he abandoned his guild to follow her and didn't hesitate to fight Tarkan over the seniority rights of being Herin's subordinate. Later on, some acquaintances of Herin's caught red-handed a woman who had been disguising as a man and tried to harass her, but our protagonist and her two subordinates stopped them. The woman thanked her savior and Herin didn't hesitate in revealing she was also a lady, so the other girl asked if she could join her. Our protagonist asked her what she could do and the other replied she was an alchemist. That surprised Herin since she didn't know what the other girl was doing there since she was not a soldier or a mercenary. Luckily, the red-haired woman guessed what our protagonist was thinking and said she was looking for a vital ingredient from around there. Herin then accepted her. In fact, our protagonist decided to form a mercenary group called Elizer since she already had 3 subordinates. As Elizer, they took part in the 100-Year War and stood by the highest bidder. Their involvement made both Valwar and Haglotten nervous, and as the name Elizer started to get recognized, the Battle of Shaun and Elizer occurred. However, in the end Herin decided to head back instead of fighting him, which took Raphine, Tarkan and Ivana by surprise. Tarkan even asked why she was doing that. But the thing was that Herin herself didn't know why she was avoiding him. In the end, the battle started while Elizer was still in the battlefield, so they were forced to fight. And they could witness how strong Shaun was and why he was also called Monster and the Demon of the battlefield. Actually, Herin was just flabbergasted watching how amazing Shaun was on the battlefield. In fact, she not only noticed he was on another level but also noticed he was even skilled in weapons that were not his. Sadly, Ivana made our protagonist to come back to her senses because in the end the whole thing was a trap to get them. Their side had retreated and they were the only ones left. The quartet ended up being surrounded and the leader of their enemies told them if they sided with Haglotten their lives would be spared. However, Herin noticed Shaun was also with them and she asked what the other were planning to do with him, and the people from Haglotten didn't hesitate in saying they wanted him dead since he was a monster and a demon. Our protagonist was not dumb and she knew the best choice in that moment was siding with Haglotten. But she couldn't make the decision and instead she just stared at him. Shaun stared back, but then she shook his head and Herin's people started asking her what was the plan while their enemies keep pressuring them into making a choice. However, Herin kept hesitating. She knew joining Haglotten was the right thing to do. Her brother needed the money after all. Besides, she had to think about her partners too. The answer was pretty obvious, but she just kept thinking about him. Luckily, her partners saw through her and helped her by saying they didn't want to join Haglotten. Our protagonist was moved by their gesture, so after apologizing to them she gave the order and Elizer began protecting Shaun, who got shocked by that move. He asked Herin why they were doing this, but she just said there was no particular reason. The battle started but Shaun made a move that almost got Herin injured, so our protagonist almost immediately put his dagger on his throat and told him that if he put him in danger again he would kill him. Shaun kept silent and the battle resumed, but Herin noticed that she and Shaun had a synergy so strong while fighting that one would think they had been fighting alongside each other for ages. It was as if their souls were one. That day, the Haglotten army was close to annihilation. Yes, the 5 of them did that. That unbelievable story was told by the soldiers who survived it. As a result, the morale of the Valwar army rose while Haglotten's diminished. That battle was called the Battle of Shaun and Elizer. Thanks to that incident, the Valwar Empire was able to win and bring peace by ending the war, and Herin had no interaction with Shaun after that. They were not friends after all. As the captain of Elizer, Herin earned all the money she could and used it to pay off the fees for Estion's tuition and their state's maintenance. Then one day, she received a message from back home. Her brother had fallen off a horse. Of course, she decided to head back home, so she informed her partners of her decision. At the beginning they thought their captain was going to disband the group, but he denied it, saying he would keep in touch. Herin promised them they would meet again, so he was going to leave Elizer in their hands until then. Rafine, Ivana and Tarkan got emotional, but in the end they parted ways. What Herin didn't expect was that Shaun was waiting for her on the road. He asked him where he was going and our protagonist replied someone was waiting for him. Shaun then told him to stay there, but he refused, saying he should go. Shaun insisted, saying that was military insubordination and that he could have him court-martialed as his deputy commander. Herin asked him to let him go, but Shaun refused. Our protagonist insisted, saying they were no longer needed. But Shaun replied he didn't care about Elizer and added he only cared about him. Herin laughed his ass loud after hearing that, while saying Shaun was quite the romantic. He then added he should pay him later for saving him, so he asked him not to die until then. Shaun replied he would try and he finally let our protagonist go. In the end, over the past 3 years, Herin had only met Shaun 3 times. However, she was aware she would never be able to forget those moments. In fact, she hoped that if they ever met again after the war they could have a proper duel to find out who was better, and after that have a drink together and talk. Of course, she did not expect the 2 of them to reunite in the form of marriage. Fortunately, Estion was not hurt badly and she even thought she could finally live freely with all the money that she made as part of Elizer. However, the Imperial order ruined everything. Herin couldn't help but complain that out of all the suitors available it just had to be Shaun Kyroxus. She couldn't forgive Prince Raymond for using her family name to make Shaun a count. She was also a war hero after all. Didn't she deserve a reward? And to add insult to injury, she had to make sure Shaun didn't recognize her. In that moment, Shaun arrived and we finally returned to where we were at the beginning of the story, with Herin complaining about the way Shaun was talking to her. Shaun immediately apologized and assured her he would try his best to adjust the clauses and send them over to her. Shaun then asked her about her younger brother, saying he wanted to meet him sometime, which took our protagonist by surprise. Herin and Shaun kept talking, but our protagonist was almost certain that the man was suspecting something. She had thought he wouldn't, especially because of her hair, but it appeared he had noticed something. The thing was she couldn't tell him she was Herge from Elizer. It wouldn't be good if people discovered that the daughter of House Targale was a mercenary, especially since the Valwar Empire had been paying Elizer a lot of money after the war. They were probably waiting for a chance to get back at them. And on top of that, Shaun Kyroxus was best friend with Raymond the Crown Prince. Not to mention, everyone in Elizer could be in trouble if they found out she was Herge. Our protagonist then replied Shaun was a student in Equez University, so Shaun would be able to meet him at the wedding. That revelation surprised Shaun, who immediately asked if Shaun had deep blue eyes like her, to which Hergine said her brother's eye color was a lighter sky blue. Some time later, Shaun was having tea with Raymond, who asked his friend about his thoughts on Lady Hergine's Targale. Shaun said she reminded him of someone he knew, an answer that was not expected by the prince. However, Shaun kept thinking that Hergine's was very similar to Herge. Even though she was a woman and her hair color was different, she reminded him of the man who left quite an impression and a debt he would never be able to repay. Of course, the prince didn't know the whole story, so he asked him how Hergine's could remind him of a lady he already knew, and then started teasing him, saying the innocent lady would be marrying the bad boy. That comment amused Shaun because Hergine's was nothing like the ladies he had met until then. She was headstrong for a daughter of a noble family, to the point she even amended the marriage contract with the tenacity of a mercenary. Luckily, Raymond didn't notice Shaun's thoughts and asked him to not divorce her and stay by her side even if he didn't want to, or else it would complicate things regarding his title. Shaun then reassured him by saying he kept personal matters out of his work. Somewhere else, Hergine's was inside a carriage and suddenly ordered the coachman to stop the vehicle since she had personal matters to attend to somewhere nearby. Some time later, Hergine's arrived at the place where her partners were, and when she saw them she greeted them with happiness, which took Raffian and Tarkun by surprise. Of course, Ivana was the first to react since she already knew the secret, and although she didn't know how the captain really looked, it was easy for her to connect the dots after seeing the behavior of the woman who had come. Raffian was the second to figure out who was the woman since he already was suspicious, but Tarkun was completely lost. He even thought Hergine's was the captain's sister. When the red-haired guy finally told the truth, our protagonist revealed the purpose of her visit. She wanted to reveal her secret and also tell them she was getting married. Of course, that second blow shocked the trio, especially when their captain said her future husband was Shaun Kyroxus. Ivana even thought she was being forced and offered herself to end the life of the bastard. Tarkun then thought that was the reason why she hesitated at the battle of Shaun and Elizer. He thought the reason was they already knew each other by that time. Hergine's tried to deny the whole thing, but Raffian interrupted her, saying there was still one thing she hadn't explained to them. In fact, the trio had heard about Shaun's marriage, but they had heard he was going to marry someone from House Targale. Hergine's then sighed, and after apologizing for keeping it a secret the whole time, she finally revealed her real name. However, Hergine's quickly tried to explain things were not that simple since she was a woman, but Raffian interrupted, saying he understood. They would make a mockery out of House Targale if they found out that a woman had been born with that talent. In that moment, Tarkun finally understood everything, and Ivana reprimanded him for being slow. Of course, the trio also realized people would be more surprised if they found out that Herge of Elizer was a woman. For that reason, Hergine's asked them to keep the secret, and the others told him she didn't have to worry about it. Ivana then offered Hergine's she would make a liquid bomb in case Kyroxus did anything stupid, but our protagonist replied that wouldn't be necessary. Raffian then offered to keep watch nearby and shoot him with his arrow, but Hergine's also refused since he would get caught. Finally, Tarkun said he would challenge Shaun to a duel, but our protagonist replied he would probably lose, making the red-haired guy sad. In the end, the quartet kept on drinking and enjoying each other's company for a while, and her partners told Hergine's that if she ever wanted to run away in the middle of the night, she knew where to find them since they would help her even if they didn't stand a chance. Some time later, Shaun returned home and Hergine's greeted him with joy since she was very happy to see her little brother. However, the boy didn't waste time and asked her why she was getting married, worried that the whole thing was his fault for not being good with a sword. Shaun then got emotional and promised his sister he would do his best to stay at the top of his class that semester. The siblings then started to chat about the marriage, but they were interrupted by Shaun, who just arrived to the state. Shaun stared at the boy intensely, and Hergine's realized he had come to check if Shaun was Herge. In fact, she thought he had run all the way there to check that just in case he ran away. Shaun then had a cup of tea, and our protagonist asked him why he had come, to which Shaun said he wanted to see her for a quick moment, and since he already had, he would be on his way. That behavior didn't please Hergine's at all because she thought that was too convenient. However, Shaun added insult to injury by asking her if she was not going to see him out. Herjins got pissed then since he was the one who had showed up in the first place. Nevertheless, in the end she agreed, and while they both were walking outside she ended up admitting that despite having quite the temper he was sure stunning. Not to mention his skin was nicely toned. Herjins then was brought back to reality because Shaun grabbed her by her waist and almost immediately got really close to her as if he was going to kiss her. Our protagonist didn't know how to react, but in the end she decided to let herself go, and after closing her eyes she got ready for the kiss. However, Shaun took her hand and told her that for a noble lady she had some rough hands. Our protagonist immediately got nervous thinking he knew her secret all along. But then she also thought that maybe he was testing her, because if he was so sure that she was hers he would have probably thrown a sword at her instead of using that roundabout approach. Herjins then told him that her family was not wealth compared to other nobles, so she had to work to survive despite being a noble lady. Of course, saying all that while being so close to him was not easy at all. Shaun then hugged her, which made her flinch, and afterwards asked her what kind of work while whispering in her ear. Herjins finally had enough, and after pushing him away she told him they were not a married couple yet, to which the man replied while chuckling she was stronger than she looked. Nevertheless, our protagonist didn't let go what had happened and told him he had no right to handle her the way he wanted. The man replied he would have the right after the marriage, but Herjins made very clear he wouldn't ever have the right to do so. However, instead of getting angry, Shaun started laughing and replied he was looking forward to it. Some time later, a red-haired woman entered like a storm in Shaun's study. In fact, his butler had to apologize to him because he couldn't stop her. However, Shaun remained composed even when the lady asked him if he was really getting married. The knight then said to the woman called Cecilia that was not the time for small talk. Nevertheless, the lady ignored his words and told him no one knew what Herjins sold while doing business overseas. She went as far as to add that for all they knew, it might not just be material goods. Shaun then made her notice those were some harsh words. Nevertheless, Cecilia didn't take the hint, and after leaning towards the knight in a provocative way she even told him she didn't care if he got married. The woman even started to undress, trying to seduce the knight. But Shaun's reaction was not what she expected, because he asked her since when was she given the authority to do as she pleases. The knight then added that he could only tolerate her disrespectful attitude for so long, which made the butler to do a huge effort to contain his laughter. Of course that displeased Cecilia, who quickly left the study while harumping. She even slammed the door. After she left, the butler told Shaun that apparently Lady Cecilia had fought with her father, Count Epernon, about marrying him recently. Nevertheless, that information barely interested the knight, who instead asked if Reeve was back since he needed to go see him. The butler replied he was not back, and then Shaun asked about Elizer, and the other said they were still working without their captain. However, he added that it seemed like they had gathered in secret recently and Herj was also present. The knight then asked what the other had found about House Targale, and the butler proceeded to report his findings. According to his investigation, in the year 994 of the enex calendar their parents passed away, and their son Estion entered Aquez University. The whereabouts of Herjins Targale at that time were unknown, although he was told that she had lived overseas for business reasons. Then in the year 996, she came back to the Valwar Empire and hadn't left since. Shaun then asked if Aquez wasn't known for its high tuition. Unfortunately, after apologizing, the butler replied that they still hadn't exactly figured that part out. However, he added they were doing their best to look into it. Shaun then started to think it was not easy trying to find people after the war, since most of them never make it back. Afterwards, he started to wonder what would have happened if he would have told Herj to stay at that time. Shaun wanted to ask Herj why he had saved him that time, although he was pretty sure the other probably would have smiled and answered no reason. The butler then got bold enough to ask the knight if he was suspecting that Lady Herjins might be Herj. However, although the question surprised him, Shaun replied sincerely, saying he was not sure. In fact, he added that he would like to see her wielding a sword. The butler then said that there was something rather trivial from that day's report. Apparently, he had been informed that Master Harvin was currently in the process of making a rapier and a main gauche. Of course, that piqued Shaun's attention since those were Herj's weapons. Not to mention he was surprised Master Harvin had accepted the order, because last time he placed an order that cranky old man didn't even bother listening to him. Shaun then recalled that Master Harvin only crafted weapons for those who were truly skilled, which could mean only one thing. The knight then ordered the butler to keep watch on the smith's shop. Some time later, in that smith's shop, Herjins arrived and Harvin greeted her with a smile. He even told her that he thought he had created a masterpiece. He went as far as to add some decorations fit for a lady and ask a friend to make a pretty case and belt for her. Herjeans was really pleased with that, and she started remembering how they had met 1 year before. Of course, at that time Harbin mocked her after she told him she wanted him to make a rapier and a main gauche for her. He then threw her a wooden stick and asked her to show her skills. It was then Herjean's turn to mock Harbin, and after purposely pretending she didn't know what to do, she suddenly executed a powerful thrust that impressed the smith. Harbin even told her she was the second because the first was Shaun Kyroxus. That revelation made her flinch, and she asked if he was making a sword for him, and when Harbin said he wasn't, she then asked him why not. The smith then told her that he didn't need one because for Shaun it didn't matter if the sword he wielded was made by the greatest blacksmiths in the world or a cheap one from the bin. Herjeans didn't fully get the explanation, but at least got relieved thinking he was not going to the shop to pick up a sword. In the end she asked him if he would still accept the order, and the smith said he would, although it might take a while. Harbin then asked her where to send the weapons, and she replied to House Targale, which shocked the smith. Back to the present, Harbin showed both weapons to Herjeans, whose eyes were literally shining since she thought they were gorgeous. However, in that moment someone knocked the door and our protagonist froze when she discovered the man who was knocking was Shaun. Herjeans quickly regained her composure and hid inside the shop in time so when Shaun entered he didn't see her. Our protagonist then decided to left the shop through the back door, but then she realized the knight had brought his men with him. In the meantime, Shaun asked Harbin if he could make him a sword and the other refused. However, in that moment the knight said there were rumors that the smith was working on a new sword recently, and he then asked what sword he was making. Harbin replied that he was working on a rapier and a main gauche, which shocked Herjeans. Shaun then asked who had placed the order, but the smith didn't say anything. The knight then said that wielding a rapier and a main gauche together was not that easy. He even added that those two things paired together sounded ridiculous. Finally, he said that only someone with a lot of experience and talent in swordsmanship could manage such an unorthodox way of fighting. In the end, there was only one person out there who could do that, Herj of the mercenary group Elizer. However, Harbin remained silent, which Herjeans deeply appreciated. The woman then thought she would leave right after Shaun. Sadly, the knight found out the back door of the shop was open, and that was the cue for our protagonist to act. She tore apart his dress to move better, used the fabric she got from that as a scarf, put on the hood, grabbed the case with the weapons, left the shop, threw the case as high as she could and beat Shaun's men in order to escape. Afterwards, she caught the case, and when she was about to leave the area, Shaun caught up with him and asked him why he was running away. He then said he thought of him as a friend, and then added that if he thought the same he would be grateful if he told him the truth and turn around so that he could see him. Sadly, Herjeans kept quiet and Shaun got angry thinking that was his answer. The worst part was that Herjeans was dying to tell him the whole truth, that she was Herjeans, the lady he was about to marry. But unfortunately that was something she couldn't decide on her own, because if people found out she was Herj, both House Targale and Elizer would be in danger. In the end, she clenched her right fist, which was the one grabbing the case, and decided to leave the place, leaving a desolate night in the process. Some time later, a butler was reporting Prince Raymond the enex followers had been roaming around the empire recently. That puzzled the prince since he hadn't heard anything about the Illwoods passing away, so he asked if the followers were roaming beyond the holy city of Enexian. Enexism was a religion accepted in many nations. A high priest called Illwoods listened for the voice of God and preached what had been said. The prince then said that the followers only left the city when it was time to search for a new Illwoods, and the butler replied that all the other countries were as confused as they were. Afterwards, the butler showed the prince a new bill sent by Elizer, which surprised Raymond. After seeing the others' reaction, the butler said that they had a lot of expenses to pay in recent times since the war was over. He then added that Elizer might side with Haglotten if he didn't sign it, since they had already been eyed by them. Raymond still complained about the whole thing because they have even offered them positions in their order of knights, but all they seemed to want was money. He then asked the butler what had Elizer been up to lately, to which the other replied they were still active, but they were only taking small jobs. The prince then said that if Elizer ceased to exist, then they wouldn't need to pay them. That statement shocked the butler, who quickly replied that the last thing they wanted was for them to be their enemy. Raymond then said that he was joking and ordered him to pay them and keep a watch on their whereabouts. The butler then left, and the prince thought he might need to talk to Shaun about that. In the meantime, in Targale's state, Herjeans was thinking about the last encounter with Shaun and concluded that perhaps it had been a good thing that she had run away. Besides, preparation for the wedding were going as planned. In that moment, Eshin arrived and our protagonist grabbed his hands, noticing some scars on his wrists. She then thought that it was all because she had the talent and not him, so she was the one to blame for those scars. She then remembered when his little brother tried to commit suicide because he couldn't stand the fact of not being talented with a sword and not being able to save their family. Back to the present, Eshin apologized to her sister because it was his fault that she had to go through that arranged marriage. Herjins then said that it was okay because she had agreed to that, so he didn't have to blame himself. Some time later, our protagonist was already wearing her wedding dress while thinking she couldn't believe she was getting married, that she was hungry and that the corset was killing her. However, she gathered her strength and went to the place where the ceremony would take place while being escorted by his little brother. She then was received by Shaun and started getting nervous while thinking he was looking very handsome. Herjins even wondered if she had always been attracted to good-looking men like him. The ceremony went on smoothly and eventually it was time for the kiss. Herjins got ready despite being extremely nervous, but Shaun took her by surprise because instead of a light kiss he decided to go for a French kiss, and a deep and long one at that. The guests and even the priest started to feeling a little uncomfortable because their kiss just didn't finish. Finally, Shaun let her go and everybody started to congratulate the new couple. Shaun was smiling like a little kid who had just done a mischief while Herjins was blushing really hard trying to catch her breath. She then gave him a reproachful look, but he just smiled and she blushed hard again. Herjins then thought that their marriage was an arranged one, nothing more nothing less, so she couldn't understand what was with that kiss he just gave her. Herjins was taking a bath and she still couldn't believe it was already their first night as a married couple. When she finished, a couple of maids called her countess, and that reminded her she was married to a count. She then thought she had heard that originally the woman had to prove her purity in an arranged marriage. The couple even have their parents over to watch their children during their first night together. Fortunately, she didn't have to worry about that since the thought of that alone was scary to her. She then entered the bedroom and was surprised because the entire decor had been redone. In fact, she thought they had overdone it with the rose petals they had placed over the bed. Herjins then removed all of them and focused her attention in the food and wine that was placed in a table nearby. However, when she was drinking the wine, Shaun entered the bedroom, surprising her to the point he was choking on the wine. Herjins then regained her composure and told him she couldn't help it because she hadn't eaten anything the entire day. Shaun didn't say anything and just got seated, so an awkward silence filled the place. Luckily, our protagonist decided to get things rolling by pouring him a cup of wine, and while he was drinking it, the woman couldn't help but started feeling nervous again while thinking they would be spending their first night together. Suddenly, Shaun asked Herjins if she was hiding anything from him. He then added that they were already married, so they shouldn't have any secrets between them. Herjins, however, didn't fall for that trick and asked him back if he had any secrets. The knight then decided to spice things up and took her to the floor. Afterwards, Shaun looked at her chest and told her she was a woman after all, which pissed her off to the point she tried to escape from him. However, Shaun grabbed one of her legs and after placing her face down on the floor and getting on top of her, he reminded her that that was their first night. That made Herjins really nervous because she thought they were about to do the deed in that moment and place. Shaun then asked her if that was her first time, and that made her react by jumping towards the bed and covering with the sheets afterwards. Shaun smiled after seeing her reaction and slowly went to the bed. Once he was really close to her, he said that they would be up all night if she kept that up. He then removed the sheets and told her that when he looked at her he couldn't help but feel angry. She was surprised by that and thought that she was feeling guilty for several reasons, but was afraid to ask him why he felt like that. Shaun then added that he still had some uncertainties inside him and was not sure how he felt, but he felt like everything was going to work out if he was with her. The knight then asked her how she felt. Herjins thought that when she looked into his purple eyes she felt like she was being pulled in, but in the end didn't say anything, so Shaun told her that if she didn't want to answer, that was fine with him. In the end, he couldn't do anything about the fact that that was her first time, but he would make sure she felt good. They then started making love and they both were truly enjoying the act. Unfortunately, Shaun noticed that Herjins' body was covered by several scars and he asked her how she had gotten them. Shaun started licking Herjins' hands while saying the calluses she had in them were as if she had held a sword before, and at that point she couldn't stand it anymore because she was both aroused and nervous, so she told him it was enough. However, he didn't stop and she thought she couldn't help herself because it was so overwhelming. She then hugged him tightly while moaning to the point her nails left some marks on his back. In the end, Herjins had to admit the whole act felt good. The knight kept going, but he never stopped asking her for directions and making sure she felt good. Shaun then started dreaming and we heard somebody saying Lady Kyroxus passed away while she was giving birth to that child, and after that Sir Kyroxus died in an accident, so people started believing Shaun was a demon who had killed his parents. We then saw the knight while he was still a kid talking to a woman and a man. The woman said she got that they were his closest kin, but she wondered what if they died too. The man, on the other hand, told the kid that from that moment on he was a servant. It was obvious that his adoptive parents treated him badly to the point he wondered why he was even alive to live that hellish life. One day the daughter of the couple tried to seduce him and invited him to her room, threatening him to not giving him any food the next day if he didn't do as he was told. Unfortunately, her father caught them in the act and the woman quickly blamed Shaun, saying he had seduced her. In the end, people kept taking advantage of him and he ended up selling himself to women for shelter and food, which little by little caused him a trauma. That was why when the war started he didn't hesitate and went to the battlefield, because he would rather fight than kept living like that. Sadly, a traitor tried to kill him, and while his consciousness was fading away, his hatred didn't stop growing. However, in the end he didn't die because a guy saved him, and that was the first time he was treated so kindly without something in return. Of course that astonished him, so he made sure to make it through that in hopes that they met again so that he could get an answer from him. Some time later, a subordinate reported Shaun that something was not right and Herin was leaving. He then told him that they had saw him gathering his things and saying farewell to the members of Elizer. Shaun then ran as fast as he could while thinking he didn't want Herin to leave. He was even willing to give him money or a title. Shaun finally caught up with him and he suddenly woke up from his dream. He then stared at Herin, thinking she was beautiful, but that there was something unusual about her since she was definitely not like the other ladies. We then found out that he didn't plan on spending the night with her, but seeing her having a little party for herself made him change his mind. He then thought she was full of mysteries and that she might be even Herin for all he knew, but he then said that even if she wasn't, that night was truly an unforgettable one, and that being with her helped him get his mind off of Herin. Some time later Herin woke up and stared at Shaun while thinking he had a unique charm to him. The knight then woke up and caught her staring at him. Herin asked him if he had slept well, and when he said good morning to her she couldn't help but blush hard while asking herself why was her heart beating that strong and fast. He then took advantage of her distraction to give her a good morning kiss that make her blush even more. She was aware that they were a couple and that they had even spent the night together, but she still didn't understand why he was being that friendly all of a sudden. She then tried to get up, but she started feeling pain and Shaun asked her if she was okay. Herin then said it was hurting thanks to a certain somebody. Shaun then said he was sure that was only part of the story, and our protagonist admitted it but added that it had not been that pleasant either. He then told her next time he would make sure it felt really good, and the woman asked him to stop talking and to help her get up. He helped her and asked her to get some rest that day since they had a lot to do starting the next day. Finally, before leaving he reminded her that the servants and maids were from the Imperial Palace, so she shouldn't trust them too much. Herin then recalled that the Imperial Palace had indeed sent servants and maids to house Targale, making the existing ones to be assigned to do trivial jobs and menial chores. Of course she knew they hadn't just sent them those new maids out of pure courtesy. That was why she told him that it looked like His Highness didn't trust him completely. However, Shaun didn't take it to heart and said that it was due to the way he was raised. Afterwards, he got close to her and after patting her head he asked her to make their marriage work together. Our protagonist tried to act as if she was feeling uncomfortable with the patting, but after he left she kept looking at the door while touching her head and blushing. Afterwards, she received a congratulatory gift from His Highness, which was a necklace paired with 2 earrings, and the 3 pieces screamed luxury, especially because of the big diamonds they had. Herin started to feel super pressured after seeing it, but tried to remain calm and said she should send him her gratitude. Unfortunately, she overacted a little and the maids got the impression the lady was not impressed with those big diamonds. However, the maids quickly regained their composure and told Herin that now that she was the Countess of House Targale, she had to attend social gatherings from that moment onwards. That brought back some memories to our protagonist, who recalled that she had already made her debut in high society. However, her family was already in ruins at that time, so nobody took interest in her. Not to mention that according to her memories, the men of high society always talked about women. Stories of harassment and their escapades were just something for them to brag about, and it was common for nobles to have a lover or 2 even if they were married. So as someone with the memories of their past life in modern society, she just couldn't relate. Nevertheless, she had to accept that from that moment onwards she would be carrying a fan and would head to parties instead of carrying a sword and head to war. Somewhere else, some butler reported to a noble that the wedding at the Targale Countship had ended, and the noble said that that insignificant fool had ended up becoming a Targale. Afterwards he ordered the butler to send the prepared gifts while making some disapproving sounds, since the noble was visibly angry after seeing some dirt on the balcony railing. The butler noticed the gesture and what had caused it and immediately went to clean the railing, while the noble thought that noble, perfect, and beautiful were not the words that best described Shaun Kyroxus. Back with Hergenes, she was in her study writing something when she suddenly stopped to massage her shoulders, thinking that she was glad Shaun and her at least worked well together. She then went to the balcony and stretched while thinking he seemed like the type to do whatever he wanted. Yet he always respected her opinion and kept her up to date on things. In the end, our protagonist simply threw herself onto the bed wondering if he was returning that day or not. She then recalled that after their first night together Shaun had been kept busy at the Imperial Palace, so she hadn't been able to see him, although he had said to her that he would be coming back that day. She then thought that a part of her wished he didn't return while another part of her wished he would. Hergenes then wondered what was that uncertainty that she was feeling because she believed she was starting to miss him. Nevertheless, that realization upset her and she immediately denied it, saying that she didn't miss him at all while jumping and sitting on the edge of the bed. She then told herself to stop having weird thoughts and started searching for something under the bed. A short time later he grabbed her two babies, her rapier and her main gauche, and decided to have some fun with them since she thought Shaun wouldn't be heading back home that night. However, almost immediately she heard something and got on guard while a lot of assassins appeared in the room from above. The intruders started to check the whole room and one of the subordinates told the boss that the lady was Shaun's wife. That startled the other because he thought Shaun would have returned from the palace by that time. In the meantime, Hergenes was thinking what was the best course of action because she was sure that taking them out was not hard, but cleaning up the mess afterwards would be a real challenge, especially if she considered she couldn't have their corpses lying on the bed. An awkward silence filled the room and soon after the assassins decided to attack. However, Hergenes, instead of attacking, told them that she was in a bit of a pinch at that moment, so she was willing to let them go. She even said that if they left without making a noise she wouldn't even ask who had sent them. Unfortunately, the assassins didn't take her seriously and continued their attack, forcing her to beat the crap out of them. Her power was so overwhelming that she didn't have to unsheath her weapons to defeat them. Of course, that meant they could keep fighting, so Hergenes decided to change her approach to the whole situation since she didn't have time for any of that. Our protagonist then challenged them because she was planning to take on all of them. Kalia was the most infamous group of assassins in Valois, and that night their target was Shaun Kyroxus, the war hero. They knew that was a really daunting task for their guild, but there were two reasons why they had accepted. First off, a blank check with no limit was put up as a reward. Second, they were honestly curious about Kyroxus, the man people called a demon. However, one of the assassins at that moment was thinking that what was happening was not what they had expected. He then saw one of his injured partners and thought he should have a broken bone. But then after looking back to the lady in front of him, he thought that couldn't be possible. She seemed so delicate and she hadn't even unsheathed her sword yet, and above all she wanted all of them to attack her at the same time. However, he was a smart guy and he quickly realized she was not an ordinary countess. The assassins then attacked her at the same time but were immediately defeated by one special technique. Afterward, Hergenes pointed her sheathed sword against the neck of the remaining assassin and asked him if they were from Kalia, surprising him since he couldn't believe she had already identified them. Hergenes noticed his reaction and asked why he looked so surprised. After all, only Kalia was capable of doing something like that in all of Valois. She then warned him, saying that if they told anyone what they had just seen, the consequences would be severe. The assassin quickly nodded while thinking everything was over because he was sure she was going to torture them to find out who was behind all that. In fact, he was even wondering if the best course of action was killing themselves while they still could. However, she ordered him to take his men and leave, which startled the assassin, although after having a second thought she decided to simply throw them through the window, saying the fall wouldn't kill them because there was grass below. Some time later, Shaun arrived and was surprised after seeing her awake and closing the window while wobbling. Hergenes then noticed him and afterwards she greeted him while walking toward him and saying she was feeling a bit dizzy. The Count also walked toward her, and when they got very close he leaned in and told her he had left her alone for too long. That startled her, but she quickly replied that he shouldn't have to hurry, while thinking she could have had that place spotless had he arrived a little late. They both kept staring to each other for a while, and then she told him he should have been really busy and asked how many days he had been away. Nevertheless, Shaun didn't immediately reply, and that made her a little bit nervous since she didn't know what he wanted. Finally, after a while, Shaun asked her if she had been waiting for him. That surprised her, but she quickly regained her composure and replied she had been waiting for him since she had so much to discuss with him about the matters related to their countship. That answer made Shaun to feel a little bit glum, and Hergenes noticed that, which made her think she had perhaps given him the wrong answer. But she wasn't sure. At that moment a flashback started and we jumped back to the palace some days before that night. At that time, the noble who had had issues with some dirt on a balcony railing was congratulating Shaun. The Count then bowed and said it had been all thanks to him, to which the blonde noble replied he had sent a small gift to congratulate him on his wedding. He then added they had heard his wife had been a peddler while she was working overseas, so he hoped Shed would have liked the gift. Of course, hearing him calling his wife a peddler upset Shaun, who immediately asked what he meant by that. He even leaned in and challenged the noble to repeat those words because it sounded like he was insulting his wife. He then said he certainly hoped that wasn't what he was trying to do. That startled the noble, but almost immediately Shaun returned to his harmless self and said he was sorry for not being familiar with etiquette amongst nobles. After all, had been wielding swords in battle that whole time, and for that reason he was sure the other would understand. Afterward, he excused himself and left. Shaun then started thinking he was very much aware the nobles looked down on merchants and that he just couldn't stand to see his smug face as he insulted Hergenes. In fact, had that been a battlefield he would have gladly killed him. Some time later, he was with the crown prince and Shaun asked him when he could go back home, which surprised the other. Raymond then told him that that was a first, and he even added that perhaps the next thing would be pigs flying over the border. Afterward, they kept working as scheduled. However, Shaun kept reflecting about how it bothered him that the noble had brought up Hergenes like that. He then started wondering if she would like the tea he was drinking at that time. However, he quickly realized she was drinking wine the night of their wedding, so he concluded she would probably prefer that over tea. Unfortunately, his thoughts were interrupted when the prince told him he wanted him to take care of Elizer for him. Shaun then asked the prince what he had meant since his wording had been ambiguous. Raymond then gave him a black smile and bluntly asked him to get rid of Elizer for him. The prince even went as far as to clarify that on the record none of that would have to do with him. However, Shaun's reaction was not what Raymond had expected, because the Count rose and told him with an angry face that even animals knew when to be grateful. That attitude gave the prince the chills to the point he even clenched the armrests of his chair. Raymond then said it was okay to let them be, and afterwards Shaun deeply bowed to him while asking him to forgive his rudeness. The Count then thought it was time to explain some things and said that the captain of Elizer had saved his life. That revelation shocked the prince, and Shaun then added that if it was about their payment then he would take care of it. However, Raymond replied it was something else, and the Count asked him if he wanted them to pledge their loyalty to the Empire. That surprised the prince, who said he had tried to convince them but he hadn't been able to do it. In fact, no one had. Shaun then smiled confidently and assured Raymond he would convince the mercenaries of Elizer into becoming knights of House Targale. Back to the present, we see the point of view of Shaun when he arrived with Hergenes, and how when he told her he had left her alone for too long he was wondering what would happen if she told him how lonely she had been that whole time. However, the weirdest part was that despite the fact the Count still had nightmares where those dreadful women who had abused him demanded him to comfort them for feeling lonely, he was actually looking forward to hear those same words if they were coming from his wife. He made an effort to remain calm and asked her to have a little chat. Hergenes accepted, and they both went to a terrace and started talking while having some food and wine. Nevertheless, Shaun didn't avoid the hot topic and asked her if she hated him. Hergenes was clueless, thinking that it had been random, and the Count was thinking she surely hated him. After all, he had given her a contract the day they first met. Not to mention he had taken over that place as the Count of her family. In the end, he had been nothing but horrible to her. While having those thoughts, Shaun nervously gulped his wine, but his wife didn't appear to be affected by the question because she just kept sipping her wine looking calm. Finally, after some time she decided to reply, asking why she should hate him, to which the Count replied there could be many reasons, so he wanted her to tell him anything. Hergenes took that as her cue and told him there were indeed tons of reasons. First of all, he was a total scoundrel. He talked like one. He was very self-centered and he acted cold towards others. Those affirmations made Shaun scoffed, and his wife took that as a confirmation of her words. He then asked her if there was anything else, and she asked back if he enjoyed being humiliated, to which the Count replied it was music to his ears. Hergenes then told him he was very strange, and Shaun finally started laughing. Afterward, he told her he thought she resented him, and she asked why, to which he replied because of the title. Hergenes then told him Shaun didn't want to become the Count since he was currently unable to take over, and she obviously couldn't become the Count either. In the end, she said she really didn't care as long as he abode by the contract, while thinking that although it was an arranged marriage, Shaun had the power and wealth to help Shaun, and a part of her had indeed wanted to see him again after the war. He replied, while caressing her hair, that he was a bit worried that she regretted all of that. Afterward, he leaned in and Hergenes started getting nervous, wondering what had gotten into him all of a sudden, since it was like he was clinging onto her. She then said it was indeed an arranged marriage after all, but not a bad one. Hergenes then rose but tripped, and Shaun was fast enough to grab her while she thought she might be drunk. However, to her surprise, the Count took that opportunity to kiss her. Well, he tried to kiss her, but Herjeans put her hand on his mouth to prevent their lips to make contact and then reminded him that they had agreed to do that once a month. Afterward, she turned around and left, leaving him bewildered. The next day, Herjeans was in a carriage while remembering the things that happened the night before, wondering why he had said those words and why he had tried to kiss her. She then grabbed her head while blushing hard and wondering if he had started to like her. However, she had a schedule to follow, so she shook her head to snap out of that. That day she had to assist to a tea party hosted by House Eppernon, and the lady that had invited her was Cecilia Eppernon, who was considered the trendsetter of high society. Some time later, she arrived at her destination, and while walking inside the place she was recalling that only single young ladies and those who had married at a young age had been invited, which made her believe that perhaps she would make a friend or two that day. After a while, a beautiful lady stood in front of her and introduced herself as Cecilia of House Eppernon, to which Herjeans replied in kind. Unfortunately, after both ladies stared to each other for a little while, our protagonist realized the whole thing was a trap. In fact, she quickly confirmed that thought because she was assigned to the loser's table. Herjeans was really upset with all that because she thought they were equals, yet Cecilia had dared to ignore her like that. However, after a while she started to think perhaps it was not all that bad, although it was still annoying. Besides, she also began to wonder what was her deal. On the other hand, the other ladies were very happy, admiring some fancy tea set that had been brought in from Ryo Kingdom, and Herjeans just couldn't understand why they were so joyful over some pieces of ceramics. Afterward, the other lady that shared the table with our protagonist complimented the Eppernon Countship, since even the way the napkins were folded was so elegant. Herjeans this time was not annoyed by the comment, since she herself believed the napkins looked cute that way. Nevertheless, she started complaining again because they had been served green tea, and she preferred black tea. In that precise moment, one of the ladies that were sat with Cecilia started complaining about the tea, saying it was too bitter, and other asked if it was supposed to be that way. Cecilia didn't know what to say and just remained silent, and the other ladies kept talking about that, saying that perhaps that was how they liked it in Ryo Kingdom. However, Herjeans took that chance to stand out, explaining that green tea was supposed to be brewed with cooled water because hot water made it taste bitter. Everybody became silent after that remark, and Cecilia kept wondering how she knew about green tea, since she thought their countship had been the first one to bring it into Valois. All the ladies kept staring at each other without knowing what to do, and then the one sitting beside Herjeans asked Cecilia not to be worried, adding that it should be the tea leaves. However, other lady put our protagonist's theory into practice and confirmed that it tasted good brewed with cooled water. Of course, that impressed the other ladies but upset Cecilia, who was trembling with rage. Herjeans noticed her reaction and realized that despite being unintentionally, she had indeed hurt the other's pride. She then thought that she knew that information, since Ryo Kingdom was similar to ancient Korea. Herjeans also thought that the hosts had probably spent a lot of money preparing those tea sets, and she had ruined it. Nevertheless, Cecilia regained her composure and said that thanks to our protagonist they were able to start enjoying the tea, and afterwards she invited Herjeans to join her. Our protagonist didn't want to sit next to her but couldn't think of any excuses to avoid that situation, so she ended up complying. Once she sat, Cecilia introduced her to the other ladies, saying she was Countess Targale, and the others reacting immediately, realizing she was Shaun's wife. One of them even said it out loud and then apologized, explaining that was an old habit of her. The ladies then started discussing about how popular in high society Count Targale was and how so many ladies had cried over him. Cecilia then said that even she used to admire him and that he was someone that all the ladies still admire because he was a true hero who tended everyone's needs. Of course, those words made Herjeans angry to the point of clenching her own dress, and afterwards she asked if he was still seeing other ladies those days. Nevertheless, her face was screaming wrath, and the other ladies got frightened by it, so none of them was able to reply. Herjeans then called Cecilia, who was also scared, and demanded her to answer her question. Cecilia just couldn't believe what was happening. Herjeans should have been the one feeling intimidated by them, but rather it was the exact opposite at that moment. Our protagonist demanded the other for an answer for a third time, and Cecilia finally replied that it was not it, adding there hadn't been any of that. Herjeans then thanked her for her honesty and afterward rose, explaining she was feeling a bit under the weather so she should head back. Back in her state, Herjeans was releasing all her fury against a salad to the point one of the maids asked her if she would like a different one, to which our protagonist replied it was fine since she didn't have an appetite, while thinking that all of it had infuriated her. She then wondered if she should just leave it all behind and go back to Elizer, considering that Shaun was all grown up, plus he was smart enough to make a living on his own after he graduated. She even considered the possibility of the Valois Empire chasing after her, and she resolved that if that was the case she could just cross the border. However, that didn't make her feel any better. In fact, her rage had just gotten stronger while wondering what Shaun had done in the past for her to hear all of that. She then thought that even if men in the Empire usually had more than one lover, that was only applicable to other men, not her man. Hergenes then raised her fist and Shaun arrived in that very moment, finding her in that position. Hergenes then turned around and the Count could see how angry she was, which made him wary of her. Our protagonist then walked towards him, and when they were very close she said she had gone to a tea party held by House Eppernon that day. Shaun realized things had gone south after hearing that name and said he had something to tell her, which made her order the maids to leave them. Once they were alone he said that even if he didn't know what had happened in that tea party, it has been all his fault. Hergenes then sighed and asked if that was all he had to say. Shaun apologized, and that was just too much for her. Hergenes then snapped at him, saying that if he wanted to make that right he should let her have her time of debauchery. Of course that upset him, and she got even more upset by seeing him getting angry. Shaun then made an effort to cool down, but Hergenes asked him what was there to even care about between them. After all, they were only married under a contract, so she told him they should also stay out of each other's personal lives as well. Afterwards she turned around and tried to leave, but he grabbed her hand and asked her to stay. She demanded him to let her go, but he hugged her instead and begged her to stay. In the end she agreed to stay, but under the condition that he should tell her what he had done wrong. Shaun then said that what he was about to say he had never told to anyone before. He even added he didn't know where to begin. Those words made Hergenes wonder if he would leave her just like he had done with all the other ladies if she ended up falling for him and became madly in love. She then tried to turn around, but he grabbed her shoulders and then he went on his knees to beg her. That gesture almost made her laugh, but she could control her urges, and after seeing his face again she couldn't believe he was looking so desperate. He then swore with all his heart he hadn't done anything shameful ever since they had gotten married, to which she asked what about before the wedding. That question made him feel uncomfortable, which in turn made her chuckle. He then promised it would never happen again. Afterward, Hergenes began to wonder what to do, and after a while she came to a solution and told him they should amend the contract. From that moment onwards they would only spend the night together when she wanted to, and they were gonna use separate rooms for the time being. Of course, that was too much for him, but she said she thought they needed some time apart from each other. That completely devastated him. Some time later he was in a balcony thinking that had been a first. Prior to that he had never lost when it came to women. In fact, he still didn't know why he had tried to stop her from leaving, and started wondering if that had been due to him thinking she might be Herge. However, his thoughts were interrupted because one of his men appeared and the Count asked him if he had found them. The other replied it was hard to sneak in there, and then asked when they were joining House Targale. He even said they were getting tired of waiting and added that Marlowe was especially fed up with playing head of the corps and wanted to go back to being the butler. Shaun then asked Reeve why the long setup and urged him to get to the point. The other then replied they had found Elizer were near Manhwa Square. He then added they had acquired information that they were staying there without much action and asked when he was going to see them. Shaun then started thinking that they might be war heroes, but they were still mercenaries, so even if they made them part of Targale's army, the nobles would oppose them because of their status. In fact, had Raymond not considered him a partner, he would have had to commit treason to protect them. Finally, the Count replied he was planning to meet them as soon as possible. Meanwhile, in a fancy hall, the assassins were having a meeting, and one of them asked if it was too late to turn down the request, to which other replied they would all die if they did that, considering the identity of the person that had requested the job. Others said they didn't know they would get beat up by the Countess, which triggered some of them who had already become her fans into saying she had been so kind to them. However, their leader told them that she had been very kind indeed in letting them go like that, but he was sure that if they were to go there again, that very same Countess would kill them all. Of course that frightened everybody, but their leader then came up with a solution and showed them the blank check. His idea was simple but ingenious. They would just take that request and bring it to someone else. He even had in mind the perfect candidate for the job. Elizer. Some time later at Elizer's headquarters, the mercenary group was visited by a guy who seemed to be nervous about something. The mercenaries asked what was he doing there, and the other replied he wanted to offer them a job. Tarkhan was amused by that statement and asked the guy if the assassins were hiring mercenaries those days to do their jobs. However, Raphine took the lead and introduced himself, and the other replied in kind, saying he was Epin, the guildmaster of Kalia. That surprised Raphine, since he was not expected the other to be from that guild. Epin then confessed to be ashamed and revealed they had recently failed to complete a request. That surprised the trio even more, and Raphine asked who was their target. Epin then gathered his courage and gave them the blank check, saying the fate of Kalia was on the line, and begged them to take the job. Ivana quickly took the check before Raphine even reacted, and the woman confirmed it was not fake. Afterward, both she and Tarkan were planning to send Raphine to do the job while deciding what to do with the money. Nevertheless, Raphine didn't lose his focus and asked again who was the target. The assassin then revealed it was Shaun Kyroxus Targale, and added that when they had arrived only the Countess was there. Obviously the trio went berserk after hearing that, and they even tried to kill Eppen. But they quickly cooled down and decided to find out what was happening first. As for the assassin, he started to connect the dots by analyzing the swordsmanship of both the Countess and Herge and realized they were the same person. Of course, the trio noticed this and started to seriously considering the idea of killing him. But in that precise moment someone else arrived and Ivana told Eppen to hide. A few moments later, Shaun entered the place and the trio greeted him while the assassin was thinking he had a sword laced with poison with him, so that was a perfect chance to kill him since he was focused on Elizer, and it seemed he was unarmed. However, only his mere presence had frozen Eppen, who just couldn't move. In the meantime, Ivana invited Shan to take a seat and she even offered him a drink, but Raphine quickly grabbed it because it was poisoned. That bothered the woman, but Shaun didn't seem to care since he wasn't planning to drink it. Raphine then asked the Count what was the purpose of his visit, and Shaun got straight to the point, asking them how they felt about joining the Order of Targale. Okay, let's rewind things a little bit and change the point of view to Shaun. The Count was on a carriage along with Reeve, who was telling his that the reason the Enexian followers were roaming about was that they were looking for a demon to end the world during the millennium. Of course, Reeve thought the whole thing was ridiculous, but Shaun didn't even care about it. In fact, after seeing how uninterested the Count was, Reeve couldn't help but ask him if he had fought with his wife, which put Shaun out of his reverie and confirmed Reeve's guess. The Count then asked if he knew what the ladies like. That surprised Reeve because he recalled Shaun had never gifted anything to the ladies who chased after him before. In fact, he wouldn't even give them a glance, so he thought that was how would treat Hergines Targale as well. Reeve suggested him to get on her family's good side. He then added he had been told that Countess Targale had a younger brother. Afterward, Reeve said that Essen's University hosted 2 forums every year, and during that time people were allowed to enter the campus. Shaun then decided to go there since the next forum was going to start soon. Some time later, the coachman stopped the carriage and informed the Count that they couldn't take the carriage beyond that point because the road was too narrow. Shaun then got out of the vehicle and told the others he was going to go alone. After some time, he finally arrived to his destination, but before knocking the door he wondered what would happen if Herge happened to be inside and what would happen if Herge was not Hergines. Nevertheless, in the end he realized that Herge would still be Herge and Hergines would still be Hergines, and that they were both special to him in their own separate ways. However, he couldn't help but feel relieved when he opened the door and confirmed Herge was not there. Back to the present, Ivana got mad after hearing Shaun's question. But Raphine knew there was more to it, so he asked the Count what was the reason behind that offer, to which Shaun replied the Crown Prince wanted to get rid of Elizer. The trio got shocked after hearing that, but Raphine quickly recovered and said they were going to give up the rest of the payment. He also thanked Shaun for his offer but told him they couldn't join his army. Shaun got upset and asked them how were Hergines and Herge related. The Count even added that if they answered that question he wouldn't bother them any longer, but if they didn't then. Nevertheless, Raphine interrupted him and asked if he was threatening them. Shaun replied he wasn't threatening them, but added that Elizer already had the Imperial family's undivided attention, so it would hard to cross the borders. He also told them that he wouldn't keep them all as his knights forever, but just long enough to lay low for the time being. In the end, he remarked the choice was theirs. The Count then rose and walked to the door while saying he would be waiting for their reply. However, before reaching to the door he stopped and told them he didn't know they had recruited a new member, which gave Eppen the shivers. Luckily for him, Shaun simply left after that. Afterward, an annoyed Raphine admitted they didn't have a choice because considering the circumstances they were stuck with House Targale whether they like it or not, and the others agreed. However, Eppen was not mad at all since he had seen a way out for his guild and asked the trio to let Kalia join the Order of Targale too. The trio got disgusted after hearing the idea. But in the end Tarkan asked the assassin how he planned to make that work, to which the other replied by pretending to be part of Elizer. He even was willing to make all the members of Kalia to be servants of Elizer if they agreed to his idea. Back with our protagonist, she was receiving some compliments from her maids because she looked beautiful, which made her feel well. Hergines was indeed trying to look good since that day Shaun's followers would enlist in the Order of Targale. And thanks to that the Order of Targale would be restored just like the old days when it was called the Black Ravens of Targale. She then recalled that the Black Ravens of Targale used to be feared on the battleground, but when an heir to lead the Ravens was not born the Ravens all flew away. and the words "Black ravens don't cry" could no longer be heard after that. Shaun then arrived to the room and asked her if she was ready, pulling her out of her reverie. The Count then added there were some people he would like her to meet before going to see the Order, which made her wonder if he had gone all the way there just for that. Some time later, they arrived to another room and Shaun introduced her to Reeve Cullens, who was the captain of the Order, and Marlowe Sepire, who was their butler. Shaun then ordered the two men to bring some papers and told Hergines they had organized the financial status of House Targale. Our protagonist then took a look to the documents and asked if all of that was his, to which Shaun replied asking her if she had heard of the Machance Corps. The Count then revealed he owned it, which startled Hergines because that was the biggest defense corps in the Empire. In fact, the butler tried to stop Shaun, but he remarked she was also the head of House Targale, so there should be no secrets. The butler then said that on paper he was listed as the owner, but in reality Count Targale owned it. He also added he used to be a merchant and Shaun had established the corps when they met each other. Hergines asked if they had met during the 100-Year War, and the butler replied that he had saved his life back then. Afterward, Hergines kept looking through the documents while thinking that they had been part of the same war, but Shaun was so different than her. Of course, she had to consider she had run away from the battlefield to take care of his family a year before, and that she had even refused the money given to Elizer. Some time later, the official ceremony began and Shaun told his followers that all of them would stand in the name of House Targale from that moment onwards. However, what surprised Hergines was the amount of people who were enlisting, because she didn't know Shaun had so many followers. Nevertheless, what shocked our protagonist was noticing that her partners from Elizer were standing among the crowd. The next day, Hergines woke up thinking that she had wanted to grab her partners by their collars and ask them what they were doing there, but she couldn't because of her position. Luckily, her friends found a way to get to her room and started to knock one of the windows to draw her attention. Our protagonist heard the call and let them enter, but they were now 4 people instead of 3. In fact, the 4th one quickly introduced himself as Epin of Kalia, thinking that she might not remember him. However, she indeed remembered him but wasn't prepared to hear that he had gone to House Targale out of admiration of her swordsmanship. Raphine then took the lead and informed her that Shaun was looking for them because apparently the palace wanted to eliminate Elizer. The Count had asked them to join the Order of Targale so that they could be protected. Of course, that made her mad because she saw that as the palace wanting to stab them in the back, but then she thought she could have lost her friends had that not happened. Hergines told them she was glad they were all there while thinking that they would all be on the run if Shaun wouldn't have helped them. However, Raphine quickly made her notice that the Count might know her secret, so she might need to be more careful. Our protagonist then thought that Kyroxus had been suspicious from the start, and she even went as far as to consider the possibility of him knowing that Herge was her from the very beginning. Raphine then told her that Epin had gone to their hideout right before Shaun arrived, and Ivana then offered herself to kill him if her captain agreed to it. The red-haired woman also added that he knew her secret, so they couldn't let him run around telling people. However, Tarkan said that Hergines had let him live, so he preferred to have him as their personal lackey instead. Fortunately for the assassin, our protagonist ended up agreeing with Tarkan's idea. Afterward, Epin told her he and Kalia would serve her for life, and Ivana started saying how great was her captain, but then Tarkan noticed someone was about to arrive, and the quartet immediately left. A few moments later, someone knocked on the door and Hergines was surprised to see it was Shaun. He apologized for bothering her that late, to which she replied it was all right. The two of them then got seated, but no one talked, and Hergines thought that was awkward but tried to justify it as a consequence of using separate rooms in recent days. Our protagonist then thought he had gone to talk about work, but he gave her a surprise because his reason of going to her room was to invite her to go to Breton with him. He then explained that the forum at Aquez University was starting soon, and she immediately realized his intention and couldn't help but be deeply moved. Our protagonist thanked him while holding her urge to cry, and he replied he had just wanted to do something she would like. Some time later in the palace, the Crown Prince was telling Duke Seraph that he had liked his suggestions that day. The noble then took the chance to tell Raymond that in recent days Elizer had joined the Order of Targale, to which the other replied he was aware of it. However, the Duke was not satisfied with that answer and said he was worried they might do something else, hinting that perhaps Count Targale could overthrow the palace. The prince thanked the other for his concern but added that he already had eyes on House Targale, so he shouldn't have to worry about it. The Duke then left, and once he was outside the prince's view he couldn't help but show in his face how pissed he was. He couldn't believe the prince thought that he had Shaun Kyroxus under control, and realized Raymond would only come to his senses when Shaun stabbed him in the back. However, in the end he cooled down because not matter what happened it would all work out the way he wanted. Hergines was packing her bags, getting ready for the journey while remembering the huge piece of information the quartet had given to her the night before. The person behind the request for killing Shaun was Duke Enex Seraph. She just couldn't believe it since he had helped his husband to become the Count of House Targael. In the end, she decided to stop thinking about that and focus on the matter at hand, that was deciding whether to take or not her weapons with her. She then recalled when the Count invited her to the university and thought that had it been Shaun before the incident, he would have been cold toward her, or he would have cut her off if she ever asked him about his past or other personal matters. Either that or he would have completely ignored her. She then wondered if that was common in other arranged marriages, and even considered the idea that he already knew that she was hers and was just repaying her for saving his life. In the end, she thought that whatever it might be, since he hadn't said anything yet, she was gonna keep her mouth shut until the very end. Although she couldn't help but admit he was getting her feeling weird. In that moment, Ivana knocked on the door and Herin let her in. Once inside, the red-haired woman double-checked the room, and when she made sure the coast was clear, she threw herself over her captain. Afterward, she got up and started complaining about her new uniform, saying it was too tight, to which the other replied she was wrong because she looked great. Ivana then hugged her tightly, saying that was why she was the best. The mercenary then added that all the people in that place were idiots. Of course, Herin understood the feelings of the other, since for an alchemist the majority of people would appear as dumb. Ivana then reported that a fight had happened that day and that it had been Shaun's men against them. That surprised the Countess, but there was more to report because Tarkan and Kyroxus had also had a one-on-one duel. The mercenary then proceeded to narrate the incidents. Apparently the trio were just hanging out when other guys started complaining about the fact that they were not training, to which Tarkan replied they wouldn't even last a second if they trained with them. Of course, that remark almost immediately led to a duel, and then to another and so on. The red-haired guy won all of them, but his partners noticed he had gotten rusty since the war. Some time later, Shaun appeared, and while his subordinate was trying to restore the order, Tarkan challenged the Count to a duel. They even decided to use real swords for the fight. Rafin showed his faith on his partner by betting his first pay on Tarkan falling within the first 10 swings. However, Ivana showed she had even more faith in the red-haired man by betting 2 times her first pay on Tarkan falling within 5 swings. Rafin then bet on 3 swings and Ivana bet on 2. Of course, Tarkan couldn't take it anymore at that point and bet his whole pay on his victory. On the other hand, Shaun didn't seem to care about the bets and offered Tarkan to go first. The red-haired man didn't reject the offer and used an attack so powerful that it created a huge explosion. However, Shaun evaded it with ease and hit his opponent with the hilt of his sword to win the duel with just 1 move. In the end, the Count asked Tarkan and the others from Elizer to take hers there. Ivana then finished the story saying Shaun had said those words before leaving, so the rest was taken care of by Reeve. She then added that only Herin would be able to stand a chance against Kyroxus in a duel. Unfortunately, their conversation was interrupted by Rosalie, who arrived to inform that Count Targael wanted to see her in his office in regards to Breton. Some time later, Herin arrived at Shaun's office and he immediately told her they had had a slight commotion involving the members of Elizer. Obviously, that caught her by surprise and she tried to play the fool by saying she had thought he wanted to talk about Breton. The Count didn't buy her acting and reminded her that they were in that together, which was why he had told her about the Machan core. He then asked her if she really had nothing to tell him. That made her question herself on what could she tell him at that moment, and almost immediately realized she just couldn't tell him the truth, because just like how he was unsure about her, she was unsure about him. Besides, she didn't want to tell him the truth while he interrogated her like that. Herin then got closer and leaned in before replying she thought he have already decided on an answer. Shaun remained silent for a little while and then said that it appeared that he had brought up a rather foolish question, and immediately thereafter he took the chance to kiss her. Herin couldn't avoid the kiss that time, but she moved away quickly while blushing and covering her lips. Shaun then told her that it seemed he would have to find out on his own. On the other hand, she demanded that he just talked about Breton. The Count decided to comply and said he had called her that day in order to finalize the people heading to Breton with them. He then added that her guards would be Elizer and her maid would be Rosalie. Herin then wanted to confirm if Rosalie would be riding with her, to which he replied that if she was worried about the Crown Prince they could take her off the list. However, she refused the offer, saying they couldn't attract attention because of such trivial matters. Nevertheless, she made him notice that even if they left together, it didn't mean that they have to arrive together. Some time later, Shaun, Herin and the rest had already begun the trip and were in the middle of some forest. In fact, Rosalie was feeling the hardships of traveling, and when the group decided to make a stop for resting, she had to remain inside the carriage while the others set up a camp. Our protagonist told her to get some rest and informed her she was going out for a walk. When Shaun heard that, he offered to accompany his wife and she accepted. Once they were away from the group, he asked her if everything was okay, and she replied that all she had done had been sitting in the carriage, so everything had been fine. She then asked how he was since he had been riding a horse all day long, to which he replied he did that all the time. After a while they both arrived to a cliff, and her jeans got very close to its edge to the point that she ended up falling. That shocked Shaun, who reacted quickly and tried to grab her, but luckily the cliff was shallow and she was not in danger. In fact, she started scratching one of her cheeks with a finger while asking him if he was going to help her up. He then jumped to get beside her while saying that it wouldn't be easy for her to get back up the summit with her dress on. That gesture surprised her since she noticed he had gone all the way down there just to help her up from below. In that moment a flock of birds covered the sky, and Shaun said something had begun, to which her jeans replied that hopefully it would end soon. Now we have a flashback where we could see how the couple planned their journey. Fernando Forest was a shortcut to Breton, but it was famous for having lots of bandits. So the members of Kalia would dress up like bandits and take away Rosalie until they returned. That way they would be safe from the eyes of the palace. Of course, her jeans felt bad for Rosalie, but she wanted to see Eshin without any prying. Yes. Back to the present, our protagonist told Shaun that the kidnapping might take a while, so they could just look around some more since she thought she had heard water nearby. Some time later they arrived to a brook and just kept walking until night arrived. Unfortunately, in that moment a group of real bandits appeared and surrounded them. The leader of the group then asked them if they were nobles, and when Shaun confirmed they indeed were nobles, the other told him that they wouldn't kill them, but they would have to give them what they got. Herjeans immediately hid behind his husband while she encouraged him to take care of the bandits. Shaun glanced at her, and after smiling he told her he would take care of them, which made her nodding with joy. Shaun quickly started to beat the crap out of the bandits, but some of them tried to attack Herjeans by treason. However, our protagonist decided to join the fun and began beating the crap out of them too. Unfortunately, at one point the Count turned to look back at her, and she had to toss the stick she had been using to fight in order to not expose her secret. Sadly, a bandit took that chance to grab her and held a knife to her throat. The man then demanded Shaun not to move, otherwise he would kill our protagonist. Of course, that made the Count really mad to the point he started to release his killing intent, which was noticed by Herjeans, who didn't know what to do. Herjeans knew she couldn't get out of that situation on her own while Shaun was watching, so she had to wait for his husband to rescue her. Nevertheless, the killing intent of the Count had gotten so intense that it gave the bandit the chills. Luckily, Tarkan arrived at that moment and told the bandits that he was there to spare them all, and then pointed at the summit of a mountain where Ivana and Rafine were ready to take the whole group down with her potions and his arrows. Afterward, Tarkan asked the bandits if they knew who they were going after. When the others looked at the other two people, they realized they were Elizer. Then the bandit who was holding a knife to Herjean's throat realized they were facing Sir Shaun. Immediately thereafter, all the bandits kneeled in front of Shaun and begged for his forgiveness, saying all of them had fought in the 100-year war, but they had had no way to make a living after the war was over because low-ranking soldiers like them didn't receive any rewards. Herjeans then took the lead and asked them if they promised that they would not live like that if they find a way to make a living, and the other replied they wouldn't. Our protagonist then told them to head to Himov since it was part of Targail's land and was not far from where they were. She then added it wouldn't be easy, but they wouldn't starve, and offered to write a letter of recommendation for them, so they stopped living as bandits and started living as people of her land. The bandits kowtowed to her after hearing that, saying she was far too kind and that they would never forget what she had done for them that night. That solved the issue and everybody returned to the camp. Shaun and Herjeans were inside their tent, and she apologized for having not discussed that decision with him, saying she would pay for any additional expenses that might occur, to which the other replied there was no need for that. In fact, he said that after their work was done they could stop by Himov on the way back to see how they were doing, which made her happy. Our protagonist then told him she had noticed that he hadn't killed any of the bandits earlier, and he replied he didn't because she wouldn't have liked it. He also added he could have taken them all on his own without having to kill, which made Herjean's heart to skip a beat. In fact, she tried to keep her heart under control while blushing really hard. Afterward, Shaun rose from the bed and left the tent, leaving her alone, which made her feel kind of sad. The next day they finally arrived to their destination, and Herjeans was impressed by seeing the city, the port, and the castle. Some time later some guards asked them their identifications and got startled after confirming they were talking to Sir Shaun Kyroxus Targail. They even asked him for an autograph since they were his fans. However, that didn't happen only with Shaun. The guards had the very same reaction when they realized Elizer was also there. In fact, one of them asked for more paper to get more autographs. After all, it was not common to receive the heroes of the 100-year war there. However, it was just a matter of time for someone to ask if Herj was with them, and that ended up happening very soon. In that moment, Raphine, Ivana and Tarkan smiled, glancing at Hergenes while listening the guards saying their wish was to see Sir Herge before they died. Nevertheless, in the end Raphine told them that their captain was undergoing extensive training in secret at that time because he was planning to become the ultimate swordsman. Of course, that made the crowd cheer enthusiastically while Ivana and Tarkan couldn't help but laugh while looking at Hergenes, who just couldn't believe what the other had said. By the way, Shaun noticed all of that and gave Hergenes a knowing smile, which she didn't like because she felt she had been caught red-handed. In fact, she used her hat to cover her face in order to prevent him to see how hard she was blushing while thinking she should be more careful. At dusk, Shaun went to Hergenes' room to ask her if she wanted to go sightseeing since they were in Breton, to which she agreed, but on the condition that they went wherever she wanted to go. Some time later they were walking through the market while she was smiling with joy and thinking that she should take Shaun to a pretty pink dessert cafe. However, in that moment something dazed her and Shaun went immediately to her side to protect her, noticing that in front of her were the followers of Enex. Shaun was surprised to see them there and Hergenes came back to her sense and said it was her first time seeing them. Suddenly one of them gave the couple a blessing, but our protagonist had a strange reaction to it which made Shaun to take her away as fast as he could. In fact, their guards didn't understand their reaction since they believed that the blessing of the followers was good luck. Once they were far enough, Shaun stopped and asked her if she was okay. Hergenes nodded, but in reality she was annoyed trying to figure out what was wrong with her because as soon as she saw them she spaced out and was confused for no reason. In the end she asked his husband to head back without knowing she had caused a strong impression on the followers. In fact, one of them said that it was the one, other replied that the wait had been worth it, and a third one said they should report to Illwoods immediately because it was already early summer, so they had only about 3 years left. In the holy city of Enexian, Illwoods was the high priest who ruled over Enexian. People said Illwoods was appointed by God, and that was because when Illwoods was about to die the followers began to spread out all over the empire. Afterward, when they found someone with divine power, that person underwent a series of tests and became the new Illwoods. And they said that the next Illwoods of the upcoming millennium would be the most powerful being to ever exist. The current Illwoods was sat on his throne while listening a new report from the followers at the Breton border. He then asked if it was the one, and the other replied that indeed the one had been found in Breton kingdom. Illwoods then said he had had a dream which worried the man who was giving the report. Afterward, the Illwoods confirmed he was running out of time, and after saying that he was worried he added that since they had found the one they should also find the other. Illwoods finally said that he was afraid they would have to request help from Ryo Kingdom. We suddenly jumped to a little town who had been set on fire, and we could see Hergenes at the roof of a manor watching how everything burned beneath her while not knowing what was going on. She then asked herself if that was a dream, and in that moment Shaun appeared next to her, but he called her Herge and his eyes seemed to be different. The man then got closer and before our protagonist could react he hugged her tightly and kissed her.